the conventional type septic fields. Like 30 years ago, you had a typical bed field, which was 7 30-foot lines of pipe, 2 feet on centers, and with gravel and sand and that sort of thing. So it was called a bed. The newer type, I think, Alex, is called a contour, or and some of them are pressurized systems, correct?
Yeah.
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 So if you're doing testing on a bed field, the only way you can do it is a dye test. You can't get your camera out into a bed.
Because you've got the pipes, and then they're all like tees off the main line with the bed field. So the camera can't get in there and navigate all those tees, right?
No.
So
you might get lucky and get down one, but the chance of telling it to turn left then right is
not so easy. Yeah. So the only way to really properly inspect a bed field is to do a dye test. So like your septic inspector can inspect the tank itself, right? They can, look at the hatches, look at the condition. Like Alex said, they might be able to get the camera in and through one lateral, but very unlikely that you're going to get any further than that. So the only real way to test that kind of septic field is a dye test. So they'll put like a non-toxic dye right into the tank. They'll run water, right? And they have a set rate, because they'll look at what the flow rate is for what the field's designed for. And then they'll run the water, and that'll help flush the dye throughout the system. And then ideally you do not want to see the dye come up to the surface or appear in the side of the yard, or down a bank, or wherever the case may be. Areas adjacent to the field basically is where you want to walk to look for it. And usually, ideally, it's within 24 hours. Now, if the field's fully saturated and like the water's coming right up out of the field, you're going to see it right away. But in some cases, the field can be saturated, but you're not necessarily going to see that dye come up right away. So often it's a good idea to check it longer than when the dye has actually gone through. And some of the factors, like if the house has been vacant and nobody's run water, nobody's flushing toilets and things like that, can play into that a little bit. So you want to make sure you know that, and you let your septic inspector know that. If the house is vacant, they may pay more attention to the load test that they're actually doing. They might run a little bit more water on the higher end of the load test rather than more on the conservative end, because there is a range, right? There's a design flow for your amount of water that your septic is, expected to take within every day.
Not on video. I took it off video, so you can't see me.
We can't see you.
Oh, they can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Sorry, I just had my sister come in.
So that's the first one with a bed field. So I guess maybe what makes sense is for us to go sort of older to newer. So a bed field is one of the older style fields. So you're going to typically see a bed field in older houses, sort of in the 30 to 50-year-old range, I would say. And then another type of kind of a bed field that's sort of a hybrid, if you will, would be what's called a bell siphon. So a bell siphon is an inspector who's familiar with septics and is knowledgeable will be able to spot it right away. But essentially in the tank, you'll see like kind of two crocks within the tank, and they're really interesting because they were designed so that your bell is kind of acts like a float, and when it gets to a certain level, then there's a natural siphon that happens with the pipe that comes up and out into the field. So it's kind of like the old school design of like a newer gravity fed field, and typically with a bell siphon, that the bell is in the tank, and then the siphon pipe comes up loops down and comes out into the field. And then the field itself is still a bed field or some sort of version of a bed field. And so that's sort of a hybrid. They don't install bell siphons anymore. It's an older design, older technology. But if you do come across one, it's not necessarily a bad thing. We've had bell siphons on properties that, you know, were 40, 45 years old and were still functioning. They were working. So, you know, we've had some where they've been, you know, what's called a modified bell siphon, where the bell part might not be working or might have been, you know, modified a little bit, but the siphon action of the pipe coming up and down and over, it's almost like a plumbing trap. And it's still working. So it's still got that natural siphon happening. So when the liquids rise in the tank and everything, I can't tell you the whole technical of how it works, but as things rise, then you get that siphon actually happen. And then it just naturally siphons out into the field. And so, yeah, they're really interesting. You will come across those again in older houses. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with them. It's just, it's something to be aware of. And, you know, at some point, like everything like has a design life. So, you know, that's why it's important to get your septic field inspected. So I guess, yeah, question?
Sorry, yeah. So I actually just recently had that exact scenario. The house is 48 years old and has a bell siphon. And it was an amazing thing to watch in action, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
But what is the useful life of these things? I'm certain the thing's never going to fail. I mean, which is in one side, it's a great thing, but you know, when you know the age of it, it's almost like you're hoping it will, because you're like, this really should be updated. But I mean, I've had septic people say, oh my gosh, it's back from the Roman days and it's the best thing ever. And I don't know why we ever went away from this. So how should we be interpreting it? Like, I know we shouldn't be afraid of them, but what is the useful life of these things?
So your traditional septic system that is installed nowadays, they say 20 to 25 years is the design life, useful life, right?
A lot of it has to do with the way the system's treated as well and used. If somebody abuses a system, we've seen them fail in 10 years.
Yeah. They
can also live a lot longer too, couldn't they?
Yes. Yeah, and that's what we're saying. Like with the bell siphon, in theory, you know, it's like, wow, it's 40 or 45 years and that's still functioning. It's still working. It's still doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Like, you don't know, I guess to answer your question, Sherry, there isn't really a definitive answer. Should it still be working now? You know, how it is? Probably not, but it does. And we've continued to come across them where they're still working and there's no problem. So often we find the bell siphon part is working. It's more so the field that's the issue. The bell siphon in the tank outlives the design life of the field. So as long as, if the bell siphon is still working and the field seems to still be functioning and isn't overly saturated and everything's percolating away and going how it should, then you're fine. I think in that situation, it's just important to tell your client, if you're on the buyer side, and even if you're on the seller side, you know, yes, it's working. Yes, there's no problem. Obviously it's not reasonable to ask for a new system if what's there is functioning, but is it going to last forever? Who knows, right? Yeah. Unlikely.
It's a prime example of like, staying in your lane. Like if the system's working and the inspector has no issue, you don't really have a leg to go say, and I want 10 grand off the purchase price because the system's older. So as long as it's working, that's all you can do.
Yeah.
Back to when Melissa was just speaking 5 minutes ago on dye tests, I had a big issue with the dye test this summer. And since this happened to me, I'm gonna make it go forward. Go look yourself. I was representing the seller. We had the septic inspected, never going to name names. The septic failed, but that failed by just his visual. They then put dye down it. The buyer went back without their agent that afternoon and claimed they saw dye. I got a email basically saying we're going to be coming at you for a full system. So I told the listing agent, I'm going to check it out tonight, and I really think you should be there with me. So me and the listing agent went out together, and no way, no how did we find dye anywhere. And with her being there with me, like, we both got to say together, like, there's no dye here. Like, there's no grounds for a $20,000 system. Anyway, and we didn't end up having to put a system in.
So saying that, I did my first one too with dye, and there is no field. It was 8 feet where it came out, the pipes out of the ground, and 8 feet from a brook.
Oh no.
But I was there, like you said, I was there to visually see it. The company I used put orange spray paint on a tree and orange on the ground to circle it. Like, it was very obvious. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, was that in Prospect?
No, that was out in Stewiacke.
Oh, I was going to say, welcome to Prospect. That's very common. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so gross. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, definitely don't just, when it comes to the dye test, don't take the buyer's word for it, especially without photographic evidence or anything. So you could, like, had I just took that for granted and at face value, my seller could have been out 20 grand.
Exactly. Yeah. So from the listing agent standpoint, you always want to see some sort of proof. So whether that's a lot of the septic inspectors will provide a video report. You need to watch it. Your seller should watch it, right? It's not the most riveting video, I'll tell you, but you should be watching them, right? Especially if an amendment's presented and, you know, you're asked to do a repair, a fix. Certainly if you're asked to do a whole field, you and your seller should have, you know, some sort of report from the inspector, whether it's a video, whether it's a written report, whether it's photos, whether it's all of the above. You know, every inspector is a little different, but in most cases, most of the inspectors are going to give you some sort of written report and a video. And, you know, if your seller doesn't, you know, believe the report and, you know, you've given it to them, it's been shared with them, you know, they're within their right to have their own inspector come in and inspect it. But they should be able to then provide the same thing, right? You want us to be able to have a video and some sort of written report, if a video can be done, right? Depending on the type of the field. But if you're, you know, like if you're dealing with a bed field, like we said, and you can't get a video out to the field, you can still inspect the tank. You can still inspect the pipe from the house to the tank. And, you know, that's a common one where you'll find sags. And just because of the grading, often they're shallow, you're close to the frost line, so you get that heaving. So, you know, that's a common one is this, you know, that pipe from the house to the septic tank is sagged, and, you know, it should be, if there's any sort of standing water in the sag, your inspector is going to pick that up and flag that as a concern, right? So that's something. And just of note, if it's a sag before the tank, so if it's a sag from the house to the tank, you don't need a licensed septic installer to make that repair. That could be just simply an excavator who's not licensed for septic. But if it's anything from the tank to the field, it must be done by a qualified septic installer, has to be. So that's sort of the difference in that. So like a sag from the house to the tank would be a much more minor thing versus, you know, a blocked pipe out in the field or a completely backed up field. All of those things that you encounter. A straight pipe where there is no field, same sort of thing, right? So if we're moving up more towards, you know, recent systems, then you start to get into your more traditionally design systems, and you'll come across names like C2, C3, modified C2, raised C3, all of these things, right? These are all different types of septic fields. So, you know, your standard kind of one, if you have a standard one, you not really, would be your C2, which is a gravity fed field. So that's where, you know, you've got your tank, you've got your field. The newer fields are designed so they go out, one main line, tee off, right? And so you've got, it goes like this, and then it's a tee out, and you've got end caps on the ends of the lines, and that's how it goes. So this is all purely gravity fed. And so everything goes into the tank, things get held in the tank, effluent goes out to the field naturally, gravity does its thing, and it just works. So that's a C2. A C3 are easy to spot, because typically your C3s are the ginormous mound that looks like the hot dog bun in the yard. You're like, oh, look, there's the field, that ginormous mound in the grass. So a C3 is what we call a pressurized field. So you've got this mound. Typically your C3 is there because of the soil conditions. So they, you know, the soil wasn't, you know, the right consistency for just a C2, or you might, you know, depending on like the topography of the land, you know, you can't get a gravity field in, you have no choice but to pump up because of the way things are laid out on the lot. So in that case, again, you're not going to be able to do a video test of the field, because you've got, with the C3, you've got a pressurized system. So you've got the tank, and then from the tank, you've got a pipe that goes to a pumping chamber. Okay, so there's a pump that then's going to pump all the effluent up to the field. So you, with a C3, the things you want to inspect are the tank itself, the pipe from the house to the tank, so everything coming from the house into the tank, the pipe from the tank to the pumping chamber, and then you're stuck. You can't go any farther than the pumping chamber, because typically the inspectors can't get their cameras around the pump and then out to the field. So again, in that case, you're going to do, you know, your video for as much of it as you can, and then you're going to do a dye test for the field itself, because there's no other way to actually inspect what's in the field itself. Typically, and this is just a generalization, with the pressurized fields, they're less likely to fail because you're getting everything pressurized and blown out into the field. You're not as likely to gonna see a C3 fail. What you're gonna run into is a problem with the pump. Anything, right? Anytime you have something mechanical, there's a chance that you can have something go wrong. So you really want to make sure that your inspector tests that pump, if at all possible. If you can ask the seller to have the tank exposed for your inspection and the pump chamber. So it means them digging 2 holes. Sucks, but it is what it is. Because you want to be able to make sure that the pumping chamber itself is functioning. There's a float in there, and more often than not, can be an issue with the float. And if the float doesn't function, if the float breaks, then you're not going to be able to get the stuff pumped out to the field. And then that's when you'll see in houses, you know, the little black boxes that say tank alarm, and they're the septic alarms. And that's why those are there, because there's a pump outside. And if the float fails or something fails in the pump, that alarm then gets triggered, and it sends that really awful high-pitched noise throughout the house. Because when that happens, you know, if you continue to use the septic, you could end up with a backup into the house. And that's why that alarm is there. It's meant to be a fail safe, so that if something happens with that pump, you're warned. And so if that happens, then, you know, from the seller's perspective, they want to call, you know, a plumber or a septic installer immediately, because typically it means that, you know, there's been some sort of malfunction in the pump, and that needs to be addressed.
Can I ask a question relative to that?
Yeah.
So if I'm working with a seller and they have a C3, which I'm going to assume they're not going to know they have a C3, they're going to have a mound, and they're going to know they have a mound.
Yeah.
Okay, so, which is great. But if I tell them, okay, make sure you uncover the tank, first of all, is it typical to have 2? Because I've heard it could be 1, could be 2, could be 3, could be any number. Is there a way to know that? But B, if they have to uncover the pressurized tank as well, the pump, then is there an estimation of here's the distance from your heads to kind of go here, dig in this direction?
So if they have their septic installation report, it's going to be on that. So the measurements will be there. So it'll give you line measurements from the house to the tank, from the tank to the pump chamber, from the pump chamber to the field. So that'll be on their septic installation report. It's from when the septic was put in. If they don't have that, sometimes it'll be on a sticker on the electrical panel where the first person who ever came to pump the tank sketched it out. If they've ever had a problem with the pump chamber also, that's where typically you'll see it. It'll be like on a, you know, one of the septic companies will have it on a sticker on the panel. If not, then the other way to tell where the pump is, because there's power to the pump, is you'll see like a little gray electrical box mounted on like a wooden post. Yeah. And they're usually only like a foot off the ground. And that's the power going down to the pump chamber.
You can
so
also,
in the brand new fields that we have today, you can tell immediately where those pump chambers are because the power is right there above the pump.
Okay, so I've seen that. I didn't know what it was for. Yeah, I was like, that's really random. I have no idea why that's in the middle of the yard.
Yeah.
Can you say that again? I missed it.
That's brilliant.
Can you say that again? Because I missed what you just said. What's coming out?
So it's a there's power to the pump. So that's the sort of the telltale sign of where that pump chamber is, because it's always further close between the tank and the field. Okay, so you'll see like the little gray electrical box mounted on like a wooden pillar, and it's typically about a foot off the ground. So like Sherry said, often they appear very random in the yard. You'll be like, oh, look, there's this sort of gray electrical thing mounted on a piece of like 4x4. What's it doing there? But that's what it's the power to the pump chamber.
So there's one that I'm dealing with currently that the septic tank, you're able to get to both sides of the chamber. And I did find a little, it looked like a clean out, but it also could be for electrical. So I'm kind of thinking there might be a pump out, but there is no mound. I'm still thinking there might be a pump, and I'm just kind of worried because that inspection's tomorrow and I don't think that's dug out.
Yeah. So now you're leading me into the next spot. We've got a newer sort of system where we call it like a modified C2. So I guess the best way to explain it is that it's a C2, not a C3, so you don't have the big mound, but you've got a pressurized system still. So you still have your septic tank, then the pump chamber, and it's pumping things out to the field. The reason you're starting to see these now, especially if you're dealing with anything in newer construction, or something that's been constructed sort of in the last, 5 years, would you say? Yep. That's what I would kind of say. There was a shift in thought with septic installers and engineers, and they thought they kind of changed their minds on the gravity. They decided amongst them that the gravity field wasn't the best design. We should really be doing a pressurized system so that everything's getting shot out to the field rather than the slow trickle. You're getting it out and then it's blasted out and everything's going to the field. So to answer your question, Dennis, you're likely dealing with a modified C2. So you're still going to have that pressurized tank to pump everything out. You're not going to have a mound. So you should still see a septic alarm somewhere in the house, because even though there's no mound, you're still dealing with power and electrical and a pump. So there should be a tank alarm in the house.
Where would that normally be?
Usually in the basement by in your utility room.
Yeah, typically it's in the
clean out.
mechanical room somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm finding a few of those modified C2s are on systems that are quite a distance from the house too.
Mm-hmm.
Like my parents have one, and their septic field is like a good, 50, 60 feet away from the house before it kind of goes into it's like this, it's the typical C2, just a line. But yeah, it's a long old system. So they're using the pump to get the effluent out to the field instead of just sitting in the lateral going to the field.
Yeah.
What would the reasoning be behind something like that where it's such a distance?
It was just, with ours, it was just lay of land with my parents. Just the way the land laid, and then we had a natural occurring wet spot, so it had to get away from it.
Oh, good to know. Okay.
Yeah. And soil conditions are a big factor too, right? So if you're dealing with, something that's more of a clay texture versus something that's sandy, ideally you want more of a sandy soil. And that's why you'll see, like if you've ever watched a septic field get installed, they'll truck in all this sand because they want to see the sand, because the sand acts as a really great filter. So, if the soil consistency is more of a clay, then you're typically not going to see a C2 field.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're going to see like a modified C2 or a C3, because the clay is not the consistency for the soil. And, soil conditions can factor into the design life of a field too. Like typically, if the soil conditions aren't great for the type of design of the field that's there, that can impact the life of the field. So like, again, if it was a C2 and the people didn't use it properly and it was clay soil, it's gonna be toast quicker than, someone with more of a sandy soil that's like taking care of their septic and, not flushing things that they shouldn't be flushing and then using all this bleach and right.
Yeah.
So yeah, all that makes a difference. What were they called? There used to be a little booklet that they put out. I think it was Wastewater Nova Scotia. Do you remember?
Yeah, I think Wastewater Nova Scotia put them out. Yeah. I think there was a few in the office, in the printer room.
There were.
Yeah.
That little booklet, it's white, and it's like a septic safety or septic do's and don'ts of septic or something on it. It's really great, especially if you've got a client that's never lived on a septic, if they've come from a municipal services area. Yes, Janice, that's it. Homeowner's Guide to Septic System. She's got it. That's the one. Yeah. That little booklet is fantastic to give to your clients if they've never been on a septic before, because it goes through, right, how to properly use and care for your septic. So, you might have, especially if you're representing a buyer, you inspect it, they spend the money to do the inspection, the field's great. But if they move in and they're not used to being on a septic and they do all this laundry all in one day, and they're not, they're pouring bleach down into there and they're flushing stuff they shouldn't flush. And right, the list goes on of all the like bad things to do on a septic, then they're going to ruin their field, and they're gonna diminish the life of their field. So it comes down to how you use it too, right?
Yeah.
And we chatted a little bit. If you caught our well mastermind there a couple weeks ago, we chatted a bit about the water treatment systems. So Alex, I don't know if you want to cover that about the backwash again, just for those who weren't there.
So like the backwash on a softener system, all that heavy salinated water should not be going into your septic system, because salt naturally, it wants to go back to a solid, and solids are bad for septic systems. You'll find typically you'll see it actually quite often that they do just go into, because the installers are, whether they're lazy or whatever, but they just tap the drain off the systems into the main drains of the home. You'll know if your softener backwash is going into your system. When you lift the cover, it's gonna look like a salt mine hanging off the cover. It'll just be white, kind of half like shiny, like sparkly, hanging off. And then, so if you run into that, you're definitely going to want, if you're on the buyer side, to look down the route of getting the backwash taken out of the septic system and into its own drain.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Most of the septic inspectors are watching for that, but it's just something to keep in mind, because, you know, that it might be something that the inspector misses, or, you know, if you're not aware of it yourself, the reasoning why you don't want that, you know, backwash from the water treatment going in. You don't want that salt to go in the field.
Yeah, the reason I have that book so close is because we just had a system fail, and failed because it looks like it was never actually connected, and the house was 38 years old. So how has there never been a backup in this? You know,
sandy soil.
Well, and so they couldn't get the camera out past probably 3.5 feet on the other side of the tank, and then it dropped down on a 90-degree angle. And so the inspector was like, "This is really weird. We need to figure out what's going on." So we had an excavator come in. Nothing. He stuck his hand into the pipe. It was all dry as a bone.
Wow.
And a squirrel ran out the pipe. So like there was nothing going into it. So we were all like, where has this been going for years? And the sump pump and the backwater for the water treatment system was all going into the tank.
Wow.
It did not look like it was. Like, it did not have that typical salty look to it. So it was just strange on many levels for that one.
Yeah.
So thankfully the buyer or the seller and the seller's agent were there when we had the excavator come, because they were able to see, because the excavators don't typically do written reports.
No. No.
So if you're going to get an excavator there, it's good to have somebody on the selling side there with you if you're on the buying side, because then they can see it and they're not taking just your word for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was
and if you run into a situation like that where, you know, the field wasn't connected, or there's like a straight pipe out going into the ditch or the stream or the woods or wherever, right? You'll have, just be aware that often, you know, if it's actually coming straight out into, you know, if it's on the surface and it's coming straight out, often most of the inspectors will report that to environment because they're required to. So if your inspector is like an actual septic installer, you know, and they come across that, you know, it's just coming straight out into the brook or the ditch or whatever, then often they'll say, like, I have no choice but to report this, right? So then you end up with, you know, if you're on the buying side, you can end up with a seller that's pretty annoyed because they've been reported to environment. And sometimes, in some cases, the seller doesn't even know that that's happening. In some cases, they do. And, you know, depending, as you get more rural, the stranger things start to happen with septic. But yeah, so just be aware of that can happen too. And then you can end up with some, you know, some cranky sellers because they've been reported to environment, and then environment gets involved and said, like, look, so we've been made aware, now you're going to have to, you know, put a new field or do a repair to the field or what have you. One of the other things to be aware of also is that septic fields are typically designed for a certain flow rate, and they also base the design for a septic based on number of bedrooms. It's kind of odd.
I think it was probably, you know, TELUS at the time down at.
Oh, Judy, we're going to move. I don't think that was meant for us, was it?
Okay.
Janice, are you able to mute?
There, she's muted.
Okay, thank you. So just be aware that, you know, and it's not something you have to know, but your septic inspectors, again, are watching for this. But septic fields are designed for a certain flow rate based on the number of bedrooms. So for a 3-bedroom home, it's, you know, so many liters. For a 4-bedroom home, it's so many liters. For a 5-bedroom home, it's so many liters, which means typically your field is bigger because you've got more volume of water going out into the field. So it needs, you know, a longer area to percolate it and get out so that your field lasts longer. So sometimes you'll run into issues, and this can be both on the buyer and seller side. You know, if someone built the house as a 3-bedroom home and the septic field was designed for 3 bedrooms, and then all of a sudden they decided to, you know, finish the basement, add an apartment for, you know, the grandparents to come move in and all of this. And next thing you know, you've got 5 bedrooms when it was supposed to be 3 bedrooms. You can run into an issue on your septic inspection.
A lot of the septic inspectors will ask for the copy of the installation report, and it'll tell them that this was designed for a 3-bedroom home. We actually had to have 90 feet added to a contour system 1 year just to get the approval through for an additional bedroom. Yeah.
So it can be done that a field can be modified. So if it was only a 3-bedroom, but say it was, you know, turned into a 5 or a 4, and you needed to add that, it can be done, but it's a tricky process. And if the field is any more than 10 years old, it's not worth it. And typically you won't get an approval from environment to do any work or modification on a field that's over 10 years old. So if the field is less than 10 years old, it would make sense to look at doing that modification to the field and extending it. You of course have to go through all the process of pulling permits and getting approvals and all of that with environment, and work all has to be done by a certified septic installer. Depending on the type of field, you may also need an engineer brought in, which typically most of the installers have a relationship with an engineer that they use for the kind of install. But just be aware of that. And from the listing agent perspective, it's something to have a conversation with your seller about. Often sellers may not know, you know, if they're not the original homeowner, but some do know. And, you know, if you say, like, is your septic field designed for 3 bedrooms, or is your septic field designed for this huge addition you've put on for the in-laws to come live here? And often if they've done everything by the book for the addition, it has been done because they had to pull permits for it. But if typically, if they haven't done permits for any of this addition, you're going to find that it's the original field and they just went, who cares? You know, we're going to just go with it. And so in that situation, you've got to be careful how you market it, because if they're aware and you're aware that, you know, the field wasn't designed for 4 bedrooms, you really should only be calling it a 3-bedroom home.
When they bought the home, it could have been listed as a 3-bedroom plus a den. And the next time we went on the market, it was called a 4-bedroom, and you can get caught up that way as well.
There's a, if you have a seller that doesn't have their documents from when their septic was installed, does wastewater keep them on file? Like, could you get one?
Yeah, you can. You can contact environment, but they only keep, the last time I checked or had a client check, they only keep them on file for about 12 years. So if the system's any older than 12, you're not going to be lucky enough to get a copy of it from them. But anything sort of less than that, you can call environment and they would have it. Cool. It might take some time and some digging, but you can get it.
Sure, there's a fee.
Yeah.
Should you guys touch on the pros and cons of getting a field cleaned? What can happen?
Oh, yes, that's a good one. Janice is laughing. That's a whole other.
Well, it's just that when you do something like that, it could, if the soil conditions were really good and they get a system flushed, it could solve the problem, or it could give you a temporary fix. And we personally ran into that ourselves as well. Where the field, they said, was not working, and they brought in somebody and had it flushed, cleaned, blown out, this is a, and it was our buyer. As it turned out, within 18 months, the thing was plugged again and not working.
Yeah, so they call, the lingo you'll hear for that flushing, often it's referred to as bed flushing. And that's what they mean. So tricky business. Yeah, it's tricky business, and, you know, the results can be varying, whether, you know, it actually works and gives the, you know, the homeowner a longer life on the septic.
It's based on the system, the piping in a especially an older type septic and in a contour, the bottom of the pipes have little holes in them to allow the effluent to get into the bedding material. If those holes get plugged up, and that's where you can run into a problem. The thing is, you don't know whether they're plugged up because the bed no longer will take effluent, or if they just got plugged up for improper use. So it's a bit of a hit or a miss, I think. Probably not ideal. So if you're going to get it done, or selling or listing a house that somebody's going to get it done, you know, I think you'd have to give full disclosure about the fact that it may only be a temporary fix.
Yeah. Yeah, I just had it looked into for a client, a buyer of mine. We were basically told numerous times by the Mr. Reuter, like, this is a Band-Aid.
Yeah.
It may fix your system for 2-3 years. It may be 10. It may fix it for 2 weeks. So yeah, basically they heavily disclose it just so you can't come back at them and say, hey, look, this didn't work, because it's not cheap. I think our quote was like $3,500.
Yeah.
To have our field done. We end up not doing it. My guy's just gonna bite the bullet and put one in. Because $3,500 and it fails again in 2 weeks. That's no fun.
Yeah.
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 Don't put bacon fat down the drain.
No, exactly. That'll clog the holes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't buy a rental property if it's on a septic. The tenant's gonna cost you 20 grand, guaranteed.
Yes, and that's the thing, right? I mean, investment properties are fantastic. It's a great way to build your wealth, and you know, you've got knowledge in the real estate market, so it's a great way for you to leverage your knowledge and you know, have that other stream of income with rental properties. But Alex makes a fantastic point. Tenants typically, in our experience, do not care for a septic system properly. They're not the homeowner. They're not invested in, you know, the long-term use of that system. So they just tend to not care, honestly. And so you really, that's something to really be aware of for yourselves and for your clients, right? When you're acting in that advisory role for a client who's looking to purchase an investment property, if you're looking at a property on municipal services versus septic, the municipal one, hands down, right? Because you've got a lot less risk for your client.
If you are selling a house to somebody that's never had a septic system before, they should be educated on how to use it, what to do and what not to do, because they wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Where do we get that information to pass it along?
Most of the inspectors carry a little booklet with them that they hand over to the
that booklet that Janice just showed. Many of the inspectors have it, and if not, Wastewater Nova Scotia would have it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Melissa, so like no matter like how many bathroom in the house, if they do the home addition and to add one extra bedroom, so no matter how many bathroom in the house, they just count the bedrooms?
That's correct, Iris. Yep. I know it seems kind of odd, but it's designed based on number of bedrooms, not bathrooms.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it will cost like roughly how much it will cost to to do the field to match an extra bedroom?
So if, like, say if you had a 3-bedroom that it was designed for a 3-bedroom and you had to move it, extend it to make it a 4, you'd be looking anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000.
And if it was a very old house, they wouldn't even do it. Or even over 10 years, they wouldn't accept that.
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And my last question in the chat list, because I come across a seller, they hire a company, to install new septic tanks and pipes to the field, but they didn't report to the Department of Environment. Is that acceptable?
No. No, not acceptable.
It's illegal.
That's yes, exactly. Yes, that's it. That's what we would call an illegal field or an illegal repair to a field. So again, you'll come across those kind of situations where, you know, the seller gets, you know, the buddy up the road or whoever to come Sunday afternoon, you know, on a Sunday and make this repair. If it hasn't been registered with environment, that's a big red flag, really big red flag. Because that means the work wasn't necessarily done by an installer. They didn't pull the proper permits. The work may not have been done correctly because it wasn't necessarily a certified installer, right? Like there's a whole list of things there that, you know, are reasons to be concerned about that. Yeah.
So you mean anything need to be touched with the septic, we need to report, like keep an eye on any report from the environment?
Yeah, any repairs to a septic field. So for, like I said before, any work that happens from the tank to the field, so from the tank out to the field, has to be done by a certified installer. And if like pipes got replaced, or, you know, you had an extension to a field, anything like that, it's got to go through environment. It should be registered with environment.
Okay.
Yeah.
And anyway, sorry. And anyway,
if it was on the other side of the tank, like tank back towards the house, then that's fine. That's no big deal. It doesn't have to go through environment. It doesn't have to be a certified installer. But from tank out to field, environment and installer. Yeah.
So can we check just directly with the environment department? Say, do you have any record about that house, that address?
You can. With the Privacy Act, you're probably not going to get any information from them. It would have to be the current homeowner would have to make the inquiry. The environment typically won't give a buyer agent or the buyer the information. It's typically because of the Privacy Act, they'll only release information to the current homeowner.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Okay, I think so. That was your question, Iris.
Yes.
Oh, the other one, cesspools. Yeah, cesspools typically are just in rural areas. In our areas where we practice, we've never encountered a cesspool. No. You've never seen one? No, in what, 40 years? 44 years, never seen a cesspool. I've never seen one. Alex, have you encountered any cesspools? No. No, so they're not really very common in sort of the HRM, East Hants, sort of that would be like Hants area.
You get out into the country and you can find somebody using an old oil tank and a pipe running off into a big hole with gravel in it. All very illegal, but those things have been done.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, we've seen, you know, old railway ties and a big hole in the ground, and you've got railway ties as the tank and goes into this hole, right? Like, you know, that kind of thing happens in more rural areas. But cesspools are not very common where we are. With a cesspool, I would be very cautious of that. And I would direct you to environment on that, or a septic installer who works very closely with environment that is knowledgeable in that area. Because cesspools bring with them a whole other risk level, and you get into then environmental issues, and you know, the possibility of having to do like environmental assessments versus like if it's getting into a waterway, and is it near a waterway, and contamination, and like, right, it kind of snowballs from there.
Yeah, it sounds like a snowball.
Yeah, I know that they're quite common out west, especially in like farmland out west, that cesspools are quite common, but I have not heard of very many here in our province. Yeah. But yeah, wastewater, Nova Scotia, or Department of Environment, I would be the people to reach out to on that.
Here's one, Melissa, I've had a little bit of experience with holding tanks. I hate them.
Agreed.
Because they're always attached to the deal of a house. How often have you heard of them being pumped?
It all depends on how big the tank is and how many people live in the house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Average. I don't know, 2,000 liter tank, 3 people in the house, like a couple months. Maybe not even.
It's been a few years
it's hard.
since we've had one. We had one on the lake. Remember we had one on the lake with the holding tank?
Portobello Road?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I run into them quite a bit because of these little communities down along Prospect, like the Dovers and deep into Terrence Bay. Like they're just houses on effing granite. You can't put a system in. So they all have holding tanks. And they're a finicky little thing to kind of advise somebody around.
Yeah.
We're talking about well or septic?
Septic.
Septic.
Okay, because I've seen cisterns for wells, and I thought we jumped topic and I missed it. I'm like, oh my God, how did we just switch? Okay, so I've never heard of a holding tank for a septic.
Holding tanks for septics are typically common on like really small lots. Like a lot of old cottage properties have holding tanks because they were on small lots, they were close to a lake, so there wasn't room for a septic field. And especially now with all the setback requirements from environment that you have to be from a water course to have a septic field, in some cases, there's no room to put one, even with like the fancier engineered like peat systems. So you'll see the only option is a holding tank. And like to Alex's point, if you've got a lot of granite, which out in that Dover area, you're gonna find a whole ton of granite.
Alex, if you look at a well report, they tell you how many gallons of water a typical family of 3 or 4 will use.
Yeah.
Just do the math, and that'll tell you how long it will take to fill the tank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine it's not a terribly cheap thing to live on.
No, like I think it's been a few years since, well, more than a few years since the last property we encountered on a holding tank. And I think that one, from the one I'm thinking of, was on the lake, and I think they had to pump it every 6 months from my memory.
Yeah, so just 2 people too.
Yeah, it was just a small little like cottage property.
And probably like a part-time use.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I just sold one last year. We were on the buying side, and it was 2 people living in the house. There was 2 people moving into the house. It was a full house. They were on a holding tank, but it was every 6 months for them. But what they had done was they had taken all of their gray water and diverted it as well, so that was going out. So this was the funny part. They were like, oh, no, all of that's going into the holding tank. And then Dean Walker was the inspector and put the dye in, and he walked the back of the property, and there was a direct line going out, and there was bright green dye coming out that pipe. And he's like, James, come here. So the seller had no idea. They had been there for years. They didn't know, right? So they weren't hiding anything. They were really quite surprised. But anyway, it was interesting. But because of it wasn't going onto a direct waterway, it was going into like a ditches that they had around some of the properties. It was fine. So Department of Environment didn't have to get involved. But yeah, it's a funny one because you can still build houses with holding tanks.
Yeah.
In them, depending on where you are.
Fun. Just easier to stay in town. Yeah, I don't think. Does anybody know how to find a septic field if the tanks are buried and obviously the field's buried when you're showing a house? So you can tell your buyer roughly where the field is.
It's on the opposite side of the well.
Pretty good rule of thumb. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wherever the well is, you can pretty much bet the septic's gonna be on the other side of the house.
And you can see the pipes usually in the basement leading out, right? If you can,
That's right.
That's right, Sherry. Yeah.
And
so if you can See the
Tell me I
clean
get
out
a
in
free
the
drink at the
basement.
Christmas party. Give me a free drink at the Christmas party.
That's right.
And not
You win
not
the
all
prize.
not all the time, but a lot of times with a nice, like, fresh, clean foundation, you can typically see a little hairline crack, which would be coming right above where the pipe comes out of the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd be able to tell where the pipe is coming out of the house, but just a little hairline crack.
That's true, because some of those would be under the floor of the basement, wouldn't they? Also,
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, typically older homes where the pipe actually came out of the wall instead of coming out subfloor, you'll see a crack coming up above grade.
Yeah.
Okay, that's very cool.
Any other septic questions? One thing sort of semi-related I'll mention, and it's sewer, not septic, but also keep in mind that if you're working in an area where there are a lot of older homes, like if you're like downtown or Peninsula Halifax, where you could be running into like some old cast iron piping, and think, the big old growth trees with all, they're beautiful, but they often have like roots that, kind of demolish pipes. It's not a bad idea to also have a sewer inspection when you're on municipal services, especially if you're working in an area like, Peninsula Halifax, where you've got a lot of older houses with older infrastructure and pipes and old growth trees.
Even a house 40 years old.
Yeah, even a house 40 years old. But we have encountered, old cast iron, or even, that's been crushed, the coming from the house out to this main line in the street. And, even sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to be the old cast iron. It can be the newer pipes, but the roots from the trees have just
and the homeowner would only be responsible from the house to the street line, which would be about 10 feet inside the curb. From there out to the main line would be the responsibility of the municipality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So not septic, but kind of septic related, just something to keep in mind. If, when you're on sewer, it's also not necessarily a bad idea to be doing a video inspection.
Yeah. I do recommend that if I see any kind of trees or anything that looks like it's got a root system, something beyond tulips, right? Yes. Then I always recommend. And if they say no, then I'm like, I offered it. They said no.
Exactly.
Another thing I've run into with septics and sewer. If the house is older and it has cast plumbing inside, typically those cleanouts where the inspector would come and put their camera will not come out. So especially if I'm on the listing side, if the house I'm listing has that, prep your seller that if and when the buyer comes to an inspection, there's a good chance that inspector will not attempt to take that cleanout out, because it 90 times out of 10 is gonna break. So they're gonna want to take a toilet up. I mean, it's 2 bolts, it's a mess, couple towels and a new wax ring, but just prep your seller that that's something a buyer might want to do.
Yeah,
that's good, Alex.
Yeah,
happens a lot in Halifax.
Yeah, I was gonna actually ask to that. So when we bought our place in 2012, it's an older spot, so it was built in, I don't know, I think 1961. There was an actual pipe out of one of the closets in the basement that they were able to get a video in and go through the lateral and see all that. But I have had my inspector, when asked about lateral, say, well, are they going to take the toilet out? Is it just an assumption that the toilet is the way to go? Or is there a rule of thumb to say whether it's going to be a toilet, if there's actually a line to go out?
There's no real assumption. Those inspectors, they do 2, 3, 4 of these inspections a day. They know the areas. They just know that there's a damn good chance that it's going to be brass or cast piping, and they're not going to try to take the cleanout out. So they just want a toilet up, or they want permission if I need to, so that way there's no awkward 20-minute wait while you try to get a hold of the listing agent on Wednesday afternoon while they're in another appointment trying to get permission to make a mess in the seller's bathroom.
Yeah, because the inspector won't take up the toilet without permission, and you need the seller's permission to do that.
In writing.
Should be, yeah.
Yeah, and if something happens where the toilet breaks or the seal, it won't reseal, not on the inspector, it's on the seller.
Yeah, don't touch that one.
Right, well, this is my point, is that I have an inspector right now who won't touch, like if he has to be the one to remove the toilet, he's like, I'm not doing it, get somebody in to do it, because if it breaks, it's on me, and I'm not doing it.
That's the safest way to do it.
That's right.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough, but if we don't know ahead of time, we either get them to look for the lateral, or then we say, okay, if we can't find this lateral, you're gonna have to pull that toilet up. You're
exactly.
get it off. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Just trying to understand my talk track.
Yeah.
I just want to say that I thought I left plumbing behind when I became a realtor, and this meeting makes me feel like I'm back in trade school. So I definitely know what we're talking about here.
You're an ex-plumber. This is the first you've talked. You should have been running the show.
Well,
yeah, you could have added some insight, Brian.
I wish I could run the show. I do have a lot of experience. I dealt more on the commercial side of things, so this residential side is relatively foreign to me. I mean, I used to work on like commercial sites for the cities and expansions for their waste management systems. But yeah, no, this made me feel like I was back in trade school. So. Yeah,
you're a great resource to have, though, Ryan.
Well, thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's really good to know, right? Because if we have questions, then to be able to.
If you need a plumber at Christmas, there you go.
Oh no! You know what? It's funny. It's funny you mentioned that, Jerry. I helped one of my family friends here, and she said, you know what? If I buy this house, you got to fix my sink. And I was like, you know what? I'll fix your sink. I'll do it for you. And you know what? I'm glad I left plumbing behind me. I can tell you that was a nightmare sink. So yeah, no, don't call me. You can call me with questions, but any work, just a disclosure. I changed. So.
Any other questions?
But just to add on, if anybody, I did put a note in the chat that I did find the guide and downloaded it. So
thank you.
Chat for anybody who wanted it to just shoot me their email. So if anybody hasn't sent me their email, put it in the chat and I will copy and paste it and throw it into an email, just in case anybody missed out on seeing that flow through on the chat.
Thank you, Sherry. That's awesome.
Not a worry. What do they say in school? Sharing is caring.
Yes, that's right. I think we had that phrase come up in a meeting yesterday too.
It's a good phrase. It's kind of awesome. So yeah. Thank you so much for this. Really, really appreciated it. I was running late with a client, so I got a text from Jen. I think it was Jen or Dennis, one of them, sent me a text saying, hey, Septic Mastermind. I'm like, I need this.
Yeah. So hopefully you guys, got lots of information out of this, and now you're feeling like not nervous to encounter a deal on a septic. And if you have questions, reach out to us. That's what we're here for. So thanks, everybody.
Go on all of those inspections and ask all kinds of questions to your inspectors. Like just ask them. And even if you form it in even if you form it in the way of, so can you explain a little bit about this system to the buyer so that they understand the property that they're purchasing? You can phrase it so that you're getting the information along with the buyer.
You don't seem brand spanky new. Yeah.
And then you're getting the education along with it. And they're all so different that each one, it's always good to be there and ask lots of questions.
Yeah, that was really cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Very informative.
I just have one question, and I know it's coming from the former plumber here, but on average, is it usually a 3 to 5 year range for cleaning out a septic system, or would you recommend yearly pumping?
Yeah, you're right on with 3 to 5. Like if you're average, like family of 4,
And it's
3-bedroom
working
house.
properly, and they're not doing things they're not supposed to. And that's a great point too that Alex brought up. No income properties on a septic. Yeah, no, that's just a nightmare waiting to happen.
Yeah.
Shouldn't say no, but just if you're
it's
helping
something to be aware, right?
If you're helping somebody look for them, just let them know. Look, tenants won't care.
Bacon grease. Oh, you can just see it. You know.
It's a risk that it's something they need to factor in, right? If they're willing to, invest in a property on a septic and have tenants in it, they've got to factor in, I'm probably going to have to make that $20,000 investment sooner than normal for a new field.
At the very least, put a filter on the outlet pipe. Just try to help it a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And get it pumped more regularly.
And I don't know. I had to hop off for a minute there, but I don't know if the secondary properties were mentioned in it. That's something we're probably going to have to pay more attention to in the future, specifically in HRM, with having additional properties, rentals within your basement, within your home, even in your yard, and how that will now be counted as part of the bedrooms. And sometimes people will get approval and sometimes they won't. For them.
Oh, that's really good to know. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's just something to keep in mind for down the road.
Yeah.
Goodness. Yeah. Huh. There's always something I pick up out of here that just blows my mind. Okay. I never thought when I was thinking about real estate that I'd be so riveted about somebody's poo.
I know.
I'm just like, I'm fascinated.
It's the glamorous part of the job, right?
Something.
If you really want to get hands-on, Sherry, you can take those bolts off and pull that toilet up if you want.
Hey, I'm one of those rough country girls, man. I could do it.
I've gone over to my listing and then pulled up the caps to make sure that the inspection was going to go good. Yeah. And we got the A-OK from the company that's coming over. Like, yep, everything's good. So we don't have to dig nothing up. And now I'm concerned about the, what did you call the modified C2? Yeah. Now I'm concerned. I think there is one and that's not dug up and it's tomorrow.
Oh dear.
But yet we had the approval from the company that's coming out to do it.
Okay. So and then maybe they'll be okay if there is a pump, they might be okay with it not being dug up, but you'll find out.
I gotta call my clients anyway, so I'm gonna see if they have an alarm in the basement in the utility room.
If they've got an alarm, you'll know.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys. I do gotta go though.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good Friday.
Hopefully, we'll see you all on Friday at the Christmas party.
Yeah.
It'll be good. Bye, you guys.
Bye.
See you guys. Thank you.
Bye, guys. Thank you, Alex.
No problem.
Thanks,
Thank
Alex.
you, Martha and Jerry.
Thanks,
bye, guys.
See you Friday.